Okay, as we continue our journey, we're going to have a good time for a couple weeks with the preacher Jonah. Now, I want us to start by thinking of 90 AD, 60 years after Jesus' ministry, when the Jewish scribes were together at the Council of Jamnia, deciding which books would be officially in their library. And so, remember, there was no Bible when Jesus lived. All there were sacred writings. And then 90 AD, the Jewish leadership scribes got together to put together their library. And so they dealt with the history, and they knew the history books they wanted to include, but they also were very careful in putting together the books to be sure the thought of the establishment, what the establishment wanted, as over against what the preachers proclaimed, to have that balance in the library. And so they got to the point of the exile, and they chose preachers. But during the exile, some Israelites were in Babylon, some in Egypt, some in Palestine. But there was one central issue about that time among the Israelites, and that was Jehovah the God of the Israelites or the God of all the nations? Now, we've looked at some other preachers and know that would surface, but the case for the establishment was clear, and Jehovah was the God of the Israelites, period. The case for the preachers was clear. No, Jehovah was the God of all nations. And so Ezra and Nehemiah were going to be in the library, and that represented the establishment's perspective on this one issue. And the other prophets touched it, but in the Council of Jamnia, they decided which book of the preachers really tackled this the best. And they decided to include a different book. And the identity of the preacher was not really known. It was not a book of history, but it was a good parable. It was a good novelette, a very short story. It was indeed probably in some ways an allegory, maybe a satire. But even though it was different than the other preachers, they said, let's include Jonah. Now, because no other sacred writings address this central issue of the Israelites than Jonah. No one did it better. Now, the problem that Jonah addresses is, how do you balance and reconcile the understanding that there is but one God? The God accepts and loves Israel, but that God of love doesn't accept anybody else and judges everyone else. And the book of Jonah addresses this issue. He addresses narrow nationalism and counters it with an understanding of Israel's love is for all. Jehovah's love is for all. It's a literary gem, but not literally true. Now, I want to just take a short sidelight journey to tell you how important that last statement is to me. It's a literary gem, but not literally true. I was preaching in Burdick, Kansas, a Swedish community, very conservative area, a very conservative congregation. And so I was preaching on the minor prophets, and I came to Jonah, and I simply said at the beginning of the sermon, well, I just said to you. And that is, some people believe it's literally true. Other people believe it's a story with a point. I personally believe it's a story with a point, but if you believe it's literally true, there's still meaning in the story, and that's what we're going to concentrate on. Well, I could tell from the nonverbal response that wasn't a very smart thing for Blake to do. And after I preached at Burdick, I had to hustle off back to Harrington to preach. And so I didn't really greet the people afterwards, but it was a cool departure for Blake that morning. And so I wondered what happened. And so Esther Hain, a wonderful layperson in the church who led the church school, was also church treasurer, and she came by and I said, well, how did church go Sunday? She just said, oh, it was really hot. And she said, they really fried you good. And I said, well, I haven't got any calls or anything. And she said, well, I'm not surprised about that. I said, well, Esther, how did you handle it? She said, I just cooled the crowd. And I said, well, how'd you do that? She said, well, I could understand. I realized that everybody was really taking you on and missing the message. So I just said to him, well, that's interesting that, what Bruce said this morning, because I've always thought that too. It was just a good story. He said, all of a sudden they attacked me instead of you. And I never had one person say anything to me about that statement. And I share that with you just simply because that's where most people are. They believe the story is literally true. And, but it also taught me what I have been taught so many times, and I hope I've learned, that laity are indeed the wisest of all, not preachers. And the way Esther handled that, it could have been devastating to my career to have that congregation ask for the DS for me to leave because of my, quote, progressive or liberal views. It didn't happen because of the leadership of laity. And that's why I'm always indebted to each one of you as I watch your leadership in the life of the church. And your leadership is also needed in terms of the Bible being a library, not a book that's being, not a group of books that's being proclaimed as being literally true. So back to Jonah. We all know the story. It's interesting, the placement in the library, because it's right after Obadiah. And Obadiah is the shortest book of in the Old Testament, just one page, and it's a judgment of God against Edom, a neighboring nation. And so right after the scribes included the book of Obadiah, they placed Jonah as a counter to Obadiah, representing the preacher's views as over against the establishment views. So if you have time this week to read Jonah, I hope you'll read it. It only takes 10 minutes. Read Obadiah, it only takes 2 minutes, and you get the sense of what the scribes did when they put these back to back. Well, we know the story. And the word of the Lord came to Jonah and say, you've got to go to Nineveh, capital city of Assyria, 120,000 people. They need to hear the word of the Lord. Jonah said, not me, Lord. And he ran away and jumped on a ship to take a trip away so he'd get away from that responsibility. And a great storm occurred, and the people on the boat believed that it was because of some passenger was being punished by the God of the seas. And so all of a sudden they cast lots. The lot came to Jonah, and Jonah fessed up that he was a Hebrew. And they said, well, you're our problem. And they tossed him overboard, and he ended up in the belly of the great fish. And he sort of had a foxhole conversion, if you will. You know, things were really bad for Jonah, but by gum, he sort of had a conversation with God, and the great fish vomited up on land, and lo and behold, he went to Nineveh. And his message to Nineveh was really short and sweet. The only thing that's referred to is 7 words in the book of Jonah. This is the message. In 40 days, Nineveh will be smashed. That was the theme. Of course, there's a lot of underpinnings of that, but that's all the book contains as far as Jonah's message. The rest is the story. Well, lo and behold, the people of Nineveh paid attention. They repented. They changed their ways. The animals, the poor, the king, the rich, the established, everyone in Nineveh wore sackcloth or burlap as a sign of repentance. And Jonah's response was he decided to have a pity party. He said, I can't, the terrible Nineveh saying yes to my message. And there's a story about being under the shade tree and sort of relaxing, and then all of a sudden the shade tree worm got to it and it fell down and he was exposed to the hot sun. And then we have this powerful last chapter in Jonah. I won't read it all. It's the 4th chapter of Jonah, so if you don't have time to read it all, read this 4th chapter. And I'm reading from the Message this morning because the paraphrase is pretty good. So then God said to Jonah, "What right do you have to get angry about this shade tree?" Jonah said, "Plenty of right. It made me angry enough to die." And he had said that earlier, that he was ready to die. God says, "What is this? How is it that you can change your feelings from pleasure to anger overnight about a mere shade tree that you did nothing to get in the first place? You neither planted nor watered it. It grew up one night and died the next night. So why can't I likewise change what I feel about Nineveh from anger to pleasure? This big city of more than 120,000 childlike people who don't yet know right from wrong, to say nothing of the innocent animals." That's the last 3 verses of the story of Jonah. In other words, why can't I change, speaking as Jehovah, when you can change so readily? Now, Jonah's message is really clear. It's against provincial pride. Any pride that you have because of a province, a state, a location is wrong. It's against arrogance that is born from parochialism. Now, my definition of arrogance is a defense mechanism for poor performance. But it's against any kind of arrogance that's born of a parochial understanding. It's a message against exclusiveness. And it's against any divine ordained supremacy. Now, quite frankly, it's one of the most powerful messages in the Bible. For Jonah said there's just no place for this cherished hatred that you believe is ordained by God and reinforced by rituals of judgment and flattering self-image. That's Jonah. great story, great message, and I think great meaning for today. So let me leave you with some questions. First of all, what are the benefits of divine exclusivity? What are the benefits of that? Secondly, what are the perils of divine exclusivity? Another question, what are the illustrations today of flattering self-image? And finally, given the definition of arrogance as a defense mechanism for poor performance, where is arrogance evident today? Enough to think about. We'll talk about it Sunday.